While the world is watching Putin, Trump, and European leaders decide the future of Ukraine, a massive story is unfolding on the other side of the world, as India is now officially moving away from the United States and forging a closer relationship with both Russia and China. You see, India is the world's fastest growing economy. It's a country you would like to have as an ally, but instead of fostering this relationship, Donald Trump has thrown India straight under the bus, hitting the country with some of the highest tariffs of any country in the entire world. Now, Donald Trump is used to bullying countries around. Let's not forget that just a couple weeks ago, he bullied the entire European Union into a trade deal that literally gave all the power and leverage to the United States. But Trump's decision to sever America's relationship with India is one he will regret very soon. Bloomberg was quick to report that Trump's tense phone call with Modi helped unravel decades of U.S. foreign policy. But how big an error will this be for the U.S.? Just listen to this prediction from Ashley Tellis, senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Trump's India strategy is really incomprehensible. This may turn out to be another one of those very costly whims of the president that the country will ultimately end up paying for. As he's done so many times in his second term, Donald Trump is overplaying his hand, and in the process, the United States has thrown away one of its most critical allies, pushing India straight back into the arms of its BRICS partners, China and Russia. Honestly, the deterioration of the US-India relationship is one of the most fascinating storylines to emerge so far in 2025. India's Prime Minister Modi was actually one of the first foreign leaders to visit the White House shortly after Trump took office for the second time. In fact, many geopolitical experts predicted that Trump would move closer to India and use the country as leverage against both Russia and China. Let's not forget, it was Donald Trump who wanted Apple to shift its iPhone production from China to India, and just a few months ago was all about embracing India as America's best friend. But Donald Trump has proved with the recent shakedown of the European Union there are no true allies under the Trump administration, and India is no exception. But here is where things get very interesting. India has much more strategic planning and leverage than the European Union. While Ursula von der Leyen and the EU have bent to Washington's will at every turn, Modi has decided to not back down and immediately pivoted to China, announcing his intention to visit the country for the first time in 7 years. What this entire situation proves is that in this world, you can't trust anyone, and you must always prepare yourself with a plan B. India's plan B is to shift away from the US and forge a closer relationship with China. But now, let's get back to our story on India, who over the years has masterfully maintained a non-aligned stance, with its fellow BRIC members China on one hand and the United States on the other. But unfortunately for India, Donald Trump has no patience for countries pursuing any path that doesn't put America first. In this administration, Trump has tried to force historically non-aligned nations like Vietnam and Brazil to pick a side, being fully convinced that he can bully any country into submission. But that strategy has already backfired. Both Vietnam and Brazil read the situation clearly and chose closer ties and massive trade agreements with China for their respective futures. Learning nothing from these failures, Trump is trying the same strategy yet again. When you look at the strategic benefits India brings to the United States, Trump's decision to strong-arm New Delhi with sky-high tariffs makes absolutely no sense. To further disrespect India, Trump went out of his way to publicly declare that India's economy was dead and that the US does little business with India and should keep it that way. To call India's economy as dead is so Trumpian. I mean, let's not forget that Trump fired his labor secretary when he didn't approve of the failing job numbers in the US. Honestly, it seems like Trump just doesn't like honest statistics. The reality is that India's economy has been growing rapidly for many decades. In 2023, its GDP hit 3.55 trillion with an impressive 7.6% growth rate, making it the fastest growing large economy in the world. India has been able to sustain this massive growth for decades, and India's real GDP rose from about 266 billion in 1991 to roughly 3.7 trillion in 2023, a more than 13-fold increase. It's funny because in the West, we always hear that India is the next China. But once again, this is Trump simply ignoring facts and creating false narratives. Not only is he wrong about India's economy not growing, he's completely wrong in saying that the US does very little business with India. The United States and India trade hundreds of billions of dollars every year. In some sectors, America is almost completely dependent on India. Take pharmaceuticals, for example. India is a global powerhouse in the field, selling more than $10 billion worth of medicine to the US annually. Nearly 40% of all generic drugs Americans take come directly from India. Now imagine what happens if Trump follows through on his plan to slap a special tariff on medications that could eventually reach 250%. US drug prices are already insanely high. This move could send them skyrocketing, and much like the rest of Trump's tariff plan, come back to only hurt US citizens more. For years, the US government has been desperate to de-risk from China in manufacturing, but in the near future, and in most industries, that's nearly impossible. China's dominance is just too overwhelming. The only country with the population, scale, and even somewhat potential to even come close was India. But now, Trump's tariffs have torched that hope. Slapping a 50% duty on Indian goods destroys the last realistic shot at diversifying manufacturing away from China. Major American companies from consumer tech to textile manufacturers have poured billions into India. For example, Apple invested heavily in Indian facilities to produce iPhones to export to the US and the world. How can Washington seriously encourage Apple or any other business to divest away from China when the next best option is suddenly hit with a 50% tariff? Honestly, it makes zero sense. And it's not just about manufacturing. India produces millions of highly skilled graduates every year, most of whom major in critical STEM fields. One of India's biggest challenges is holding on to this talent, as so many of their brightest minds move abroad. And one of the largest destinations for the talent is, of course, the United States, where this talent becomes the backbone of the US tech industry. Just look at Silicon Valley, where Indian-born CEOs and innovators lead some of America's biggest companies, like Alphabet, Microsoft, IBM, and Adobe, to name a few. Now combine these tariffs with a crackdown on foreign students, and you get a perfect recipe for making sure that those future AI pioneers, engineers, and scientists never set foot inside the United States. Instead, they will stay home and strengthen India's tech sector and probably work closer with China to weaken the US over the long term. In addition to these economic blows, potentially losing India as an ally is disastrous for the other major US policy of Chinese containment. And once again, this is where it gets really interesting, because the US has made it a major policy goal to encircle China through military bases and strategic partnerships with all of China's bordering countries. For many years, India had a long, intense relationship with China, from ongoing border disputes to a deep-rooted historic rivalry. That means the US didn't need to do much to keep India as either a strategic thorn in China's side or even a potential partner in any conflict between Washington and Beijing. But now, with these new tariffs and Modi's high-profile trip to Beijing, the US is effectively taking one of its most valuable chess pieces off its board indefinitely. But more importantly, Trump has now caused India to fully move closer to China, which is a major win for BRICS, another win for Russia, and another clear example of the multipolar world we now live in. In effect, Trump's decision to isolate India fails on all three fronts. It undermines efforts to divest manufacturing away from China, it damages the domestic US tech sector, and it fails US strategic goals. As we've said on this channel before, this is the kind of move that you would make if you were actively trying to destroy American influence. So the big question here is, why is Trump pursuing such a disastrous policy? Well, the trigger for this was India's decision to keep importing Russian oil, despite US sanctions tied to the war in Ukraine. But once again, the United States is caught in a deep level of hypocrisy. Trump is penalizing India, even though there are plenty of other countries who are literally doing the exact same thing, including the United States of America. Many countries, in fact, still buy oil directly from Russia. And in the case of the European Union, they're even buying Russian oil through India as an intermediary. If this hypocrisy wasn't already glaring, the United States is also guilty of the very thing it accuses other countries of. In addition, the United States still imports Russian uranium to power its own domestic nuclear industry, and not even in small amounts. In 2023, a full year after the newest Russian invasion into Ukraine began, the US bought 27% of its enriched uranium from Russia, more than any other supplier. And even today, a substantial share of America's nuclear fuel still comes directly from Moscow. So when the US demands that India plays by the rules that itself does not even follow, it's no wonder that New Delhi is drifting closer back to its BRICS alliance. Washington has made it clear that it doesn't value loyalty, it values control. And to show you exactly what I mean, let me give you a real-life case study from Africa. After a state visit to Beijing, Kenya faced intense backlash from the US and even the threat of losing its ally status and access to key security agreements, all because it praised China's role in shaping a new world order. Even a deal between two sovereign nations like China and Kenya is apparently too much for Washington to tolerate. And with Trump, the pattern is very clear. He penalizes other countries not out of principle, but because he's a bully, and nobody wants to deal with a bully. This is precisely why Prime Minister Modi is taking a stand. In addition to his very public pivot towards Beijing, Modi has also doubled down on his commitment to another BRICS partner, Russia. In direct response to the tariff, Modi's dispatched his national security advisor to Moscow and followed up with an even stronger message on X. I had a very good and detailed conversation with my friend, President Putin, and reaffirmed our commitment to further deepen the India-Russia special and privileged relationship. He even added that he looks forward to hosting Putin later this year. Now everyone pay attention, because every word here is intentional, especially the choice to describe Putin as a close friend. In my opinion, this was 100% an intentional remark aimed squarely at the Trump administration. Modi used this term friend to remind the United States that India has options. The United States wanted India to abandon its trade ties with Russia. Instead, it got India to double down on them. But Modi didn't stop there. Speaking at a public event later that week, he warned, "I may have to pay a very heavy price personally for refusing to cave to Trump, but I am prepared for it." From global world leaders across the globe to America's own foreign policy establishment, everyone is scratching their heads at this strategy. Everyone except those inside Trump's cabinet. The prospect of returning to the once warm Modi bromance is fading fast, and India is now digging its heels in, cementing its relationships with both Russia and China. And everyone, that's the new reality we live in. Trump has managed to take one of America's most valuable partners and push it directly into the arms of one of its biggest geopolitical rivals. India isn't just another country. It's a nuclear power, the world's fastest growing economy, and a manufacturing powerhouse in the making, and the supposed counterweight to China. But now that India is shifting closer to China and Russia, the United States may have just lost its most important ally in Asia for the foreseeable future. Losing that kind of ally isn't a small foreign policy misstep, but a generational mistake. But this isn't just about losing India. This is single-handedly accelerating the shift towards a multipolar world. Every time Washington uses economic coercion against a partner, it validates the BRICS narrative that the world needs alternatives to US-led systems. India, already a founding BRICS member, now has every incentive to deepen ties within that bloc, not just with Russia and China, but with a growing list of countries eager to challenge the US dominance. In trying to force India to bend, Trump may have permanently altered the balance of power in Asia. Instead of isolating Russia, he strengthened the Russia-India partnership. Instead of containing China, he's driven India closer to Beijing. And instead of shoring up America's role as the default partner for rising powers, he's shown the world that the US alliances can be discarded on a whim. While Trump is busy playing short-term power games, India is positioning itself for a central pillar of an emerging multipolar order. And in that order, Washington is no longer the only option on the table.